The first time the Ring of Power slipped onto Frodo's finger, he became invisible and went into Wraithworld. And because of that, Sauron and his Nazgul were able to find him immediately. They knew to come to the Prancing Pony. But when Bilbo put it on for the very first time, he remained undetected. No one came after him. He only stayed invisible to those who weren't in the world of the unseen, but even the ones who were in that world could not spot him or even detect him. Why was this the case? Let's find out. Welcome to the very first video on this channel. I will be uploading content specifically catered to Middle-earth, and perhaps answer some of your burning questions, like in this video. So let's first establish that in the books Frodo isn't always seen. In fact, for the most part, he isn't at all. Aside from Bree, the other occasions where he wears the One Ring are on Weathertop, on Amon Hen, Tom Bombadil's house, when the Fellowship gets separated, and Mount Doom. Believe it or not, Mount Doom was the only time that Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower, was able to find him. So that means that the scene in the very first movie is wrong, to perhaps speed the process along a bit, instead of explaining that the Gatekeeper was a spy, and was one of the ones who alerted the Nazgul. Now there are two times that Frodo was tempted by the ring. Once where he actually went looking for the Dark Lord on Amon Hen, and another time when he finally gave in to the ring's full power and wanted to claim it as his own. This happened because at that point Frodo had it for 13 months, plus the 17 years he had it in his possession prior to leaving the Shire, which is quite impressive considering the ring only got stronger as time went forward, and as it got closer to his birthplace. Much stronger. And it didn't affect Bilbo nearly as much, even though he had it for over 60 years, because Bilbo never used it for any other purpose than to run away from Gollum, orcs, and of course, his annoying relatives.
I'm not at home.
In the Fellowship of the Ring, we see these tall statues looking high and mighty, and we don't get much of an explanation as to what they are, other than when Aragorn says,
Argonath, long have I desired to look upon the kings of old, my kin.
He explains it, but it may be still quite vague for those who haven't read the books, so that's why we're about to embark on our journey back to Middle-earth. The Gates of Argonath, or the Pillars of Kings, are statues that honor Isildur and Anarion, brothers originally from Númenor, who shared a throne and ruled over Gondor together while their father, Elendil, would spend most of his time in Arnor. After the death of Anarion and Arendil, during the 7-year siege of Barad-dûr, Isildur became High King until the disaster of the Gladden Fields, where he was ambushed and killed by orcs from the Misty Mountains, alongside his men and his 3 eldest sons, Elendur, Auratan, and Sirion. After this event, the throne was then passed down to Anarion's 4th child and only son, Menildil. Many years later, the Argonath was built by Remindasil II in TA 1340 as a monument to these great kings, who are shown holding an axe in their right hand and raising their left arm to push away anyone who opposed Gondor at the northern border. What you may not know is that in the film, the 2 statues are of Isildur and Elendil, instead of Isildur and his younger brother. They are also depicted as holding swords rather than axes. The river Anduin led into Lake Nen Hithoil, which eventually can lead into Amon Law and Amon Hen, also known as the Hill of the Eye, which is where the Fellowship was ambushed and then separated. One of those frequently asked questions, like the one about flying on the eagles, is the question as to why Elrond didn't kill Isildur. And I have to admit, that's a very good question. I mean, as Isildur was walking away, couldn't Elrond just have pushed him off or forced the ring off of him? Well, to find out, let's take our journey back to Middle-earth. Now, when Isildur was escorted to Mount Doom by Elrond himself, he gave in to the ring and let it consume him. Elrond was just standing there, and could have easily pushed him off with the ring. Unfortunately, it's actually not as easy as it sounds. The reason for that being is Isildur was now under the full influence of the ring, which of course allows the user to become more powerful, especially the higher they rank on the chart. So Isildur would probably have bested him. And I know that's not a good enough reason. Elrond should have at least tried, right? Wrong. It's because of this very chart that the Eagles wouldn't be able to take Frodo straight to Mount Doom, and because of this chart that Elrond wouldn't be able to even come near it. What exactly am I talking about, you may ask? Well, this chart represents the level of each species' power. The higher you rank, the more powerful you are, and thus the more susceptible you are to the ring's influence. And that's why hobbits like Frodo, Sam, and Bilbo are able to hold it, and the effect is very little on them. Now you may argue that, no, Frodo was affected by it, and he almost did the same as Isildur. Though that may be true, since by the end of it, Frodo had it for 18 years, one of those years being in his pocket or around his neck the whole time. One other reason may that he probably wouldn't have killed Isildur because he is the king of Gondor, and he is a good friend of his. And even if it makes sense to do something as such, it's much easier said than done. If you were in that character's position, it probably wouldn't even cross your mind, let alone act upon it. And, I mean, would you have expected Sam to do the very same thing to Frodo when he was about to do that? Happy late New Year everyone, and happy birthday to the man himself, J.R.R. Tolkien. So, a commenter in my last video asked a question about the Palantir. He asked, "Here's one I've always wondered. Why does Sauron think, according to Merry, that Pippin has the ring? I know he touches the Seeing Stone, and Sauron sees him, but after all that's happened with Frodo and the ring, why would Sauron suddenly believe that the ring was with Pippin?" Thanks for the question. Now, I was gonna make 2 separate videos explaining what the Palantiri are, what they do, where they came from, and a whole other video addressing the question. But I decided I would tackle both in this one video to rule them all, so get ready, and let's take our journey back to Middle-earth. First, let's discuss what the Palantiri are. The Palantiri are also known as Seeing Stones, and the word is derived from Quenya words. Palan means far and wide, and Tir means watch. These stones are used to communicate with one another, and the known number of stones are 7. They are also used to show particular visions, and things they wish to be shown to the recipient, like in Sauron's case, where he shows himself as an eye. He also shows the white tree burning, his physical form, and even Arwen. These dark stones varied in sizes, some smaller and some bigger than others. The big ones are reported to be so large, in fact, that it cannot be lifted by men. The 7 Seeing Stones were created by Fëanor, an elf who also created the Silmarils. More detail on that for another time. These stones were given as gifts to the Númenóreans by the elves, and then they placed them in these locations. At least, that is until the fall of Númenor. After that, 3 of the stones remained in Middle-earth. The one sitting in Orthanc, the one in Minas Ithil, now known as Minas Morgul, that Sauron uses, and the one in Minas Anor, also known as Minas Tirith. These stones are so dangerous, especially when they wind up in the wrong hands, and are the reason for Saruman's turn. Sauron was able to deceive him through it, which happened because Saruman was trying to deceive him, and then it backfired because it had an inverse effect. Sauron was also able to deceive Lord Denethor II into believing that there was no hope left for Minas Tirith, or for the entirety of Middle-earth for that matter, which is probably why Denethor seems so twisted in the films. Now this is where the answer to the question comes in. You see, Gandalf never mentioned anything about the ring being with Frodo in the Shire to Saruman in the books. He had to figure it out all on his own. And so after what Saruman was able to figure out, the only thing that was known was that a hobbit had it. They never figured out which one. So this is when they were finally able to deceive the ultimate deceiver himself. When Pippin used the stone from Orthanc, even though he didn't do it intentionally, and thankfully he mentioned nothing, and when Aragorn wanted Sauron to bring out his armies so that they could face him at the Black Gate to buy Frodo and Sam more time as they walked through Gorgoroth, where it was the most heavily guarded, full of orcs, and where Barad-dûr is stationed. The other day I uploaded this video, the Palantiri Explained. And even though I'd said I'd only make one video about this, I need to address some errors that I had made and perhaps add on some more information. Now you may be thinking, errors you say? And I know, how could I have let that happen? This is actually why I was so hesitant on creating this channel in the first place, because I know I'm supposed to be the expert here.
He said he's an expert!
And it's my responsibility to get it right, but at the end of the day, I'm nothing more than just another fan like you. And with that being said, I'll try my best to not do it again, but if it does happen, and it most likely will, I'll be sure to correct it as soon as I can. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and fix it. These mistakes were brought to my attention by Reddit user Christopher J.R. Tolkien. The first thing I got wrong was that the Númenóreans had them until the fall of Númenor, but I think that may have been the case of something where I had misspoke, since I had edited out a piece of the audio that sounded quite a bit weird. The next thing I got wrong was that I implied that one of the stones lost was the Elastirian stone, when in fact it was taken by Elendil to Tower Hills, where it was later guarded by Círdan the Shipwright, an elf who accompanied Elrond and Isildur to Mount Doom. This stone could be aligned with the Master Stone in Tol Eressëa, the Lonely Island, which wasn't one of the 7 that was gifted to the Númenóreans, and therefore stayed in Aman. So now that I have corrected what I have said, let's dive into a bit more detail. In the Unfinished Tales, Part 4, Section 3, it discusses information on the stones themselves, and how they came into the possession of the Númenóreans and their eventual fate. They were kept in guarded rooms, high and strong towers. Only kings and rulers and their appointed wardens had access to them, and they were never consulted nor exhibited publicly. Just like other stewards, Denethor II had access to them, but unlike them, he was the first one to actually use it. The Ithil Stone could have been lost due to its defending, destroying it before its siege. However, the more likely explanation, as I had mentioned in my last video, was that Sauron was now in control of it, which may have also been the reason why the stewards of Gondor never used theirs. If it isn't in use, then Sauron cannot connect with them, and thus cannot have any power over them.
You have no power here.
They became nothing more than ancient artifacts, and were not needed as a mode of communication, as they had already had errand riders and messengers to do that. And their primary concerns would be regarding descent and kinship. The Stone of Osgiliath was another Master Stone, which was one of the ones they ended up losing, after Eldacar, grandson of Remendesil II, who had the Argonath built as mentioned in this video, took up his place on the throne in TA 1432. Eldacar was seen as unfit for the throne, as he was considered to be a half-breed due to his mother being of the middlemen, who were considered to be a lower class. Because of this fact, the leader of those in opposition to Eldacar's rule, Castamir, drove Eldacar out and became known as Castamir the Usurper. Doing this came with a heavy price, as the Dome of Stars was destroyed, the Palantir was lost, and after murdering Eldacar's son, a civil war known as the King Strife broke out. 2 other stones were lost at sea. The Stone of Amon Sul, or Weathertop, had to be moved as the tower was destroyed when it was invaded by Angmar's army. It was taken by King Arvedui, who was trying to take them to the north. Unfortunately, the ship that was taking him there ended up getting shipwrecked, and therefore, both of them were then lost. Now that we have discussed their fate, I had previously said what their purpose was and what they did, but I want to give more insight into how the stones actually work. When they are placed on top of a surface, some of them need to be positioned upright in order to work properly. It would allow the surveyor to look west from the east side of the Palantir, and vice versa, for example. If it falls from its place and it's not matching the Earth's poles, it would be quite difficult to fix. Some of these stones, however, do not need a specific position. When looking through a Palantir, it's quite blurry and unclear, and if someone wants to make it clearer, so certain things appear closer, it requires concentration, which requires a lot of energy, and should only be used in times of urgency. The Palantiri can only see some things with light projected onto it. This means that they can see through mountains, but if there is no light present, it cannot be seen. In some cases, however, even when the light is present, it may seem as though it isn't, sort of like a VPN. This method of protection against the stone is called shrouding, and it is unknown how it is done. Hey guys, thank you for watching. This was a supercut of my first 5 videos on this channel, all remastered and upscaled in 4K. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and let me know if you want to see more of these supercuts, and all my future videos will also be uploaded in 4K. But until our next meeting, as always, I bid you farewell.